Alright, hello there and welcome to another After Effects tutorial, and in this one we're going to be covering the blending modes. So how do the blending modes work? Well, if you notice here I have this footage of a swan, and let's say I wanted to blend this into my underlying layer of my waves right here, this clip right here. How would I do this? Well, I would first have to make sure that I have my modes open, and if you don't see this, go down here and select your expand or collapse the transfer control pane. And if you still don't see it, just right click up here, go down to columns and make sure you have mode selected. Okay, now to make this swan actually blend into our waves down here, we have to select a certain blending mode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select screen right here, and notice that my swan is blended into my footage underneath. Now, one thing you need to know with the blending modes is that it works from top to bottom. So the layer you're going to be blending is called your source layer, and then the layers underneath it are called your underlying layers. Notice if I was to drag my swan underneath the waves, it would not be blended in. It works from top to bottom. So that's just the overview of how the blending modes work. Alright, so now just to give a little bit more info about how the blending modes actually work, what is happening here is this. When we select a blending mode right here, After Effects is applying a certain algorithm to our top layer here, which adjusts the pixels of our top layer. Notice that without this top layer here, if I turned it off, the bottom layer would look normal. But when I turn it on, the pixels of the top layer are affected and they cause a certain blend to happen with the bottom layers underneath it. So that's a little bit more detail on how the blending modes work. It's an algorithm on your top layer that affects the layers underneath it. Okay, so now we are going to look at a few of the blending mode options that we have here. So here I have this marble texture, and if I open up my options, I first have the normal, and I have things like dissolve and dancing dissolve. And how the dissolves work is that they adjust the pixels when the opacity is lowered. So if I was to select dissolve and then open up my opacity by pressing T, and then drag this down, notice that the pixels are being affected in this grainy type of way. All right, I'm gonna set this back to 100. And then we will look at the next section right here, which is called the subtractive section. And what this section does is that it can remove your whites and your bright colors. So if you want to remove a white background, you would use something in this section. And the blending modes in this section can also darken your colors. So if I was to say select multiply, notice that the whites are now gone and I only have the black that was in my texture. So that's how the subtractive section works. It removes your bright colors. Now we're going to look at the additive section. And this section works almost as the opposite of the subtractive section. You could probably guess it's going to remove your dark colors and it's going to lighten your colors. And if you have a black background, it will remove the black from the background. So I have a clip here of this black wall, and if I was to say select screen, notice that a lot of the black has been removed. We'll try maybe lighten. All right, a lot of the black on the top has been taken away. Linear dodge, lighten color. Okay, good. Moving on. Now the next section that we want to look at is this section here, which is called the complex section. And this section here works off of your luminance or your brightness. And it will do a blend off of the grays in your image that are brighter than 50% and off of the grays that are lighter than 50%. So if I was to select something called overlay, it would work off of the gray. Now next we have the difference section. And this section is going to work on the difference between the two color values between your source layer and your underlying layer. So I'm going to select, say, difference. So this is what the difference blending mode looks like. Now let us look at the color section, or the hue, saturation, and luminance section. This section here creates color shifts based off of your hue, saturation, and luminance. So this is what the color section looks like. Now we're going to look at this section here called the matte section. And how this works is that it's going to create a matte with our source layer. So if I select Stencil Luma, notice that a matte has been created. And I'll drag in my swan clip here because I think it's going to show it a little bit better once more. And I will set this to Stencil Luma. Notice that a matte has been created. And we're going to look at the last section here. So I'm going to turn this swan off. And then I'm going to create a shape just to show you. Draw this out like this. And what these last two down here do is that they can work on the edge of your graphic. So if I was to select Alpha Add and then zoom in here really closely like this, and then I switch it to luminescent premol, notice there's a difference in the edge right here. So that's just a quick overview of how the blending modes work in After Effects. I'll be sure to leave some resources that you can read up more on if you want to learn more in the description. And I hope that you learned something in this tutorial. And we will see you in the next one. Until next time.